Welcome to the Golden Flower Podcast, the sanctuary for your creative soul. I'm writer, intuitive, and digital artist Angela Levesque.
And I'm Gemma, artist and creative coach who loves working with sensitive, intuitive creatives to flow on their creative journey.
Well, I am very excited, Gemma. This is our 10th episode, and we are talking about the creative process. Now, we've kind of danced around this idea of the creative process for a while, but today we're really kind of going to deconstruct our process, or in some cases, our non-process. I imagine, I don't know fully about yours, but I imagine, Gemma, yours is going to be a little less structured than mine based on our personalities. Yes, we'll get into that. But we thought for our 10th episode, it would be a good idea to kind of to go back to the basics. We looked at what people are searching for when they're thinking about creativity, and over and over and over it comes up. People are asking, what are the steps in the creative process? What is a creative process? So we're going to be talking about that. I think to start off with, when we talk in general about the creative process, it's really how we go from, ideas, creative thinking, and how we bring that idea into being. So, as I mentioned, for some of us, that's going to be a lot more structured than for others. And when people do search the creative process, just to give a little bit of a background, some people say there's like a 4-step model, a 5-step model, a 7-step model. So generally, like in the 7-stage model, there's intending, incubating, investigating, composing, deepening, completing, and then going public. And I have a lot of thoughts on that, which we'll get to in the next segment. And then the 5-stage model is preparation, incubation, illumination, evaluation, and implementation. A lot of Asians in there. And again, we'll get into this, but there's a lot that seems really top heavy and not a lot of like one of those steps is, okay, now you actually create it. And there's a whole bunch of stuff before that. But arguably, I think the idea of having your ass in seat and getting shit done is a big part of it. So,
That's a
Gemma,
step that's a step I recognize. All the others, I'm like, I listen and I read them and I'm like trying to like hold, what any of those steps are, but ass on seat, getting stuff done. I know a little bit about that one. I'd like to know more, but yeah.
but the idea of intending, so that has
Okay.
something to do with intention, idea, right? Incubating, things are just kind of, you're letting things kind of stir within. Investigating, you're probably doing some research. Composing, you start putting ideas down. Deepening, again, probably things becoming more and more into focus. Completing, and then going public. So in that 7-step model, it might be the first 5 steps is like 25% of the process. And then the completing is actually, like I said, like the lion's share of it. So
That helps. Just having you elaborate just a little bit on those steps is really helpful because, like, yeah, okay, intention. I think I used the word percolating instead of incubating, but it's the same thing, letting things. Okay, so I was thinking as we go, if you spot that I'm talking about a particular thing and it seems to match to one of those, I'd love to know if you think I haven't spotted it. I'm always so intrigued, like, where's the system within my system? And I know that you might have a better idea than me. So just
because I imagine as we get into this that you have a structure in your non-structure. Like you
Mhm.
still have a way that things come about that might not be preparation, incubation. Like the idea of this 5-step model where it goes into preparation, incubation, and then illumination. For me, illumination's always first. So I think of that as like the inspiration, right? Depending, unless somebody comes to me specifically and is like, here, I need you to create this. And I already have like, okay, so there's parameters already built into the request. And then I'm thinking, okay, so I need to prepare let me think about this, and then inspirations drop in about how to actually execute on that specific set of parameters or that specific vision that somebody has. But
Oh,
that's
right.
that whole 5-step model for me is kind of it's not entirely backwards, but it's not in the right order, at least for how things come for me if something is coming in organically. So do you have thoughts, or do you want to
Just
go
that
jump
word,
in?
we can jump in, but just briefly, like illumination. This a bit of a strange one there. Like you say, the placement of it, this idea that what you're in a room and the lights are off, and then suddenly the light goes on and you can see things. I
You're
guess
preparing in the dark.
yeah, I kind of get like I might know what that means. Like the moment that something is on, like there's a moment of clarity. I don't know. It's still a bit of a strange word to use. Let's go in.
Yeah. All right. Well, we will dive into our own creative processes when we get back from this ridiculously short break. All right. Well, today we are talking about the creative process, and we are going to kind of use our own experiences and share how we kind of move from this idea into execution. And for you, hey, Gemma, have you ever seen, this is an American show. Have you ever seen, oh goodness, The Good Life or The Good Place? We think about time and it goes in a linear
Yeah,
fashion.
fashion.
Okay. And that's what we think, but they actually say, no, time runs in Jeremy Bearimy. So it's like this weird, like convoluted, nothing in a straight line. And that's really how time works. And so in my mind, your process is closer to Jeremy Bearimy than, than it is to like point A to point B to point C. So I'm gonna see how close that's my prediction.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the reason you're saying that is because before I would talk about my processes, I would talk about where I'm coming from, and I have to kind of, I feel like it's important to express that, being the INFP type, introverted, intuitive, feeling perceiver, but all INF types have this, and we often come with ADHD, organizational challenges, shall we say. But I think I'm throwing that in because even though you might not know Myers-Briggs personality tests and you might not care about more ridiculous labels, but you might feel that, you might recognize that you might be a bit of a perfectionist, a lot of a perfectionist, and that it might be costing you your creativity. And you might know that you're rejection sensitive, and that also that you're super passionate. And the two are like painful to go together, super passionate and highly sensitive to rejection. And that you feel this pull towards your creative expression, but there are some torturous elements in there because of how idealistic and visionary you may be, in terms of like you kind of have a sense of what your potential might be, but there's a lot of stuff that gets in the way. So I'm speaking from that kind of place, and I think what sums that up is I'm speaking from someone who on some level still doesn't really feel like I have full permission to pursue my art life, and I'm out of juice and energy for wrestling and fighting with that part of myself. I accept that it's just going to be there. So my process is a little bit like, how do I work with this lack of permission? And still, as you know, I've managed to create a body of work, a body of paintings, and there's more to come. And I do a lot of writing, and videos have been made, courses have been made. There's been a lot of creative output, kind of like against the odds. So what I share might seem like you could quite easily dismiss it as procrastination, but I'm going to share it because I've had many experiences where similar types have shared just what they do to get stuff done. And it's been like, I do that. I didn't think that would constitute as part of a process, but I do that. And that's what may or may not come out of me sharing. And I'm kind of curious. I mean, I don't know which bit to launch in on, but are you going to talk about your process as a digital artist or as a writer or both?
Well, that's what I was gonna mention. It really depends for me. Like, I guess there's like a loose structure for everything, but it depends for me. Like, the process for writing a book is different than the process of writing an article, is different than the process of creating digital art for me. Um, there's always, like I said, there's some common threads in and common concepts in the way that I work through it. But obviously, like writing a book, um, that was like 3 years of my life. So that's a whole different experience than, okay, I'm sitting down, I'm going to write a, 1,000-word article on such and such. And usually, that starts the way that I choose the article that I'm going to write. It starts with the inspiration. It starts with interest. Like what is kind of on my mind right now. So like recently I've been thinking a lot about the rebel archetype. So the next article I'm going to write about is the rebel archetype, because I'm like, why not go with that energy, go with that interest, and then write it. But obviously something that's like a screenplay or a book, that takes a lot longer, that process looks, the very beginning stages probably look a lot similar to anything that I create, whereas, I'm just kind of like playing with the inspiration. And then there's this sort of filtering down as things become more and more dense, more into form. Then I start to, I think that that's where my processes start to like bifurcate. Is like once the idea starts to filter in and come into form, and then I'm starting to, whether it's outline or because obviously there's way more planning that would go into a book or a screenplay than would go into creating a digital, like one of my moving meditations. So it depends. Is it same for you? Because I know you've created in a few different mediums. Do you feel that your non-process process is similar, whether you're painting or writing?
Yeah, I mean, question for you. Do you have notebooks? Like when you talk about the ideas coming together, are you handwriting stuff out? Are you a notebook person? Just curious. I'm going to talk
Yes.
about notebooks in a moment a lot.
I have, yeah, I buy really, I don't have, usually I have one like at arm's reach. I really like, I buy beautiful notebooks that are like my ideas, and I write them down. And, I also do, like, for articles, I have a couple of different file folders of article ideas that come up, like, I don't have time to execute on them, but I'm like, oh, this is interesting. And then if for some reason I need to go write an article and nothing's really, coming in, I'll go and look at that and I'll be like, oh yeah, I could go and elaborate on that idea. So I'm sure, do you have notebooks? I'm sure you do.
I have notebooks. I have notebooks. Yeah, I have a few notebooks. I currently have 2 years worth of notebooks in my vicinity, which means I can reach for them if I need to, which on occasion I do. Always have one, either like plain paper, or recently I've strayed into the pages with dots. I'm like, I like this a lot because it makes it easy to write and draw. And yeah, my notebooks are really for complete like splurge, I think is the best word. I would say step one of my creative process, the thing that I always do, no matter what it is that I might be aiming for as my output, whatever, whether it's in paint, whether it's designing a course or making a video or whatever it is, it's all going to start with the notebook. And my relationship with my psychic debris, which is just that it's all welcome and it all needs to come out before I have any idea what's there. Because you were saying, like, you were saying just earlier, I have an idea, it comes in, I've been thinking about the archetype of the rebel, blah, blah, blah. For me, I might not really know I might not even know. I can take this podcast as an example. I had no kind of like drop in, you're doing a podcast. I had over a period of time from the end of last summer I was spending more time sitting on my own while my daughter was napping, when she still napped at that point, doing my downloads, I call them sometimes, and writing. And I was starting to spot themes around voice, me paying more attention to podcasts that I was listening to, me finding myself writing things that I could imagine maybe I'd like to share in a pod, what like just the first beginnings of like, ooh, maybe I would like to speak about something like this. All very innocent, and I'm never that quick to kind of know, but that's why I have the notebooks, because they will show me over a period of time that there's some themes popping up. And then part of what happened at the end of the summer was, I'm noticing that sometimes we call it the teacher archetype, the one that wants to guide, the one that wants to contribute into that space of what the creative journey is and how it shapes us and why it's so important. Things that I just love thinking about and can't stop thinking about. When that started to get more lively, and yeah, it's almost like my notebooks tell me what to do. It's not like I would write a sentence like, now it's time to join a coaching course, which is what happened, and that's how we met. But I become aware of what's going on internally over weeks, sometimes months, of just letting myself see what's going on, and then periodically rereading things. So I really need to have that space. And because I've had notebooks for so long, I feel like it's not just about the fact that I have space, it's about the fact that I give all this splurge my attention. I don't just kind of write it and don't go back there. Because there's a kind of journaling that you can do, right, where you wake up in the morning and you write stuff down, and it's making space, but it's not necessarily stuff that we go back to. It's more about like, it makes space and that's kind of it. For me, it is more like I do have to do the raking through a little bit of the to-do lists and all the kind of mundane stuff. I've tried to separate my notebooks and be like, okay, I'm going to draw in this bit, and I'm going to do my to-do list. I'm going to do ideas for projects here, and I just can't. It all just comes all at once like a big ball of wool, and I have to kind of pull it into something. Yeah.
I totally relate to that, because I will try and have books that are kind of like, you were kind of describing the morning pages, where you're basically just like writing to kind of, I imagine it's like blowing the dust off a book, like just getting stuff down. And then I have ideas, and then I channel things, and then I have things that like are downloads, and I try to keep those all separate, but it just ends up being, I always tell my husband that if I die before him, just don't read any of my books. Because you'll think I should have been institutionalized or something, because there's like people talking in first person and third person, and talking to me, but using like, it's just it's a whole
Yeah.
thing. So what happens? So say now you have an idea that you're wanting to like manifest, to bring into fruition. What's the next thing for you?
So I keep forgetting, like, this is not an episode on notebooks. They are important, but they're not the whole thing. So then I was thinking, like, my step 2 is I start to become aware that there's something that wants to come through, and then I go into like a different kind of phase. And I think when I was thinking this is a bit like surfing, but I was like, generally you're not a surfer, and I want to be. I'm seriously thinking about giving that a go, but I think there's something here in that the way my mind works is I can't just kind of lock onto an idea and then identify the action steps to then make it happen. But what I can do is start to create the conditions that are more likely, that when conditions are favorable, much like the surfer can't decide on their own, she can't, she might really want to surf on that day, but if there's not enough wind and the ocean doesn't want to play ball, it's not happening. And so for me, it's a bit like, what can I do to make conditions more favorable so that when I get that impulse, I'm much more likely to be able to take some action, because it's always difficult for me to get into the action. So I just wrote a few things about what that might look like. So it might start with like, I need to ring fence alone time. Like I'm not a solo warrior anymore. I'm in this total, I don't want to say codependent, I want to say interdependent system, family system. If I need something, I need to negotiate for it and all of that. So that is a big part of it. I then let myself kind of encourage the being alone normally means that I have a bit of space to pick up the guitar, do things that are modalities of playful creative expression, even if singing on the guitar has nothing to do with what I want to do. Like the podcast has nothing really to do. I'm not going to start bringing out my acoustic guitar. I'm sorry to say. But there's something about that. I need to get back in touch with that part of me that likes to respond to the moment. You know, I really like that spontaneousness. I like to improvise. I like to find that part of me. So I start doing more of those kind of things. I listen to more music, and then I put this on like when I'm preparing to like get going on some painting or really committing to, you know, preparing to record podcast episodes, something that's like a shift in commitment, you know, it's actually going to happen. I have to allow a bit of space to unravel, you know, like it's like the pressure of this, you know, practicing writing things, practicing improvising, practicing like gearing up and like building that intention, building my confidence through what I'm writing in my notebooks. It takes time. It's like the cyclical spiral thing. And at some point I just have to be like, okay, I have to just unravel. And that might just look like, what does this look like? Just kind of being really unstructured for a couple of hours. I don't know, eating weird food, watching random stuff, just being like really lost for a little while. Like I always have to have this unravel phase. If things are not flowing for me, it's because I haven't allowed myself to drop the ball and just go blah, like watch stuff that's not particularly nourishing, eat food that's not particularly good for me, lie around and just not know what I'm doing. This is what I call unraveling. And it can look like such a waste of time. Like, you know, people I'm sure could listen to this and really question, like, really, that's part of your creative process? That's delusional. But, you know, I'm a big fan of Lauren Sapala, and she's a fantastic coach for INF writers. And when she shared that part of her creative process for writing was that she would just turn on music and just lie on the floor listening to it for hours on end, I was like, yes, yes. There's something, I don't know, about the intensity and the complexity of holding so much when you're the type, you know, you're receiving so much information all the time, and I feel like, without sounding like a victim, that I feel like I expend a huge amount of energy just on normal life and just being able to process everyday things, that to take the step to then put my energy into a creative process, I don't actually have that much extra energy available. This is why my process has to be a combination of what I'm already doing plus some kind of need that I have. You know, like my painting, for example, was born out of, you know, I already, you know, this intrigue and interest about color and all the way that it communicates, plus this kind of need to discover if it was possible for me to work with my intuition. Like, you know, there was a need and there's a question. So a lot of the things that I'm drawn to are that combination of things that I'm already do. Like I'm always appreciating color everywhere, especially in nature. Like it took me a while to understand that not everyone receives such a multi-dimensional in such a multi-dimensional way of simple things like the light going through a flower or a plant leaf or something like that. But I'm always absorbing this kind of thing. So for me, painting was just like, oh, I can work with what I'm already doing. I'm already painting without painting. Let's see what happens when I actually paint with paint. What I mean is I don't have the capacity to kind of squeeze myself into particular shapes in order to get things done. I have to kind of look at, not, I can't even consciously say I look at what I'm doing and I make it work, but yeah, I
So
just
is this something I want to, when you actually have your ass in seat, or, you know, putting paintbrush to canvas, you're taking big breaks? Like, would you go and lay on the floor in the middle of that
No.
experience?
No, this is all building up to the go moment. This is all, I'm still in preparation.
You are Jeremy Bearimy.
I am doing a Jeremy Bearimy, right? I feel like if I was looking back at the model we put in the intro, I'm like, am I still in the preparation phase? No, I'm in launch phase. I don't know. But a lot of it is also similar to the surfer, you know, who makes sure that she's fit and got her kit ready. I also need to be like, to some extent, like, get into a bit of a routine. Like, I know that I'm better when I do stretching in the morning, and if I'm sleeping at 10. So there's this sense, they sound so obvious, but they kind of come in and support me to. And then if I make a first step, like, I don't know, like, I haven't painted for a while, and let's say I create a painting for a friend or someone's birthday or something like that, I immediately share it with trusted other people. If I'm procrastinating, if I've been wanting to write an article and I haven't made the step of like publishing it, I'll share the draft with people, because I've learned that I just need to make something in whatever form it is and then quickly share it, because then it exists. Then there's some accountability, then there's some feedback, and I can, because this whole thing about not really knowing the next steps, not really having like a procedure in place, I kind of need a little bit of feedback from people, even if it's not like the feedback tells me what the next first step is. My intuition tells me, just from having something to work with. I mean, you could, in a nutshell, the whole process is a lot of perhaps nonsensical kind of preparation, just to kind of get something down on paper or something recorded or something written, even if it's just a tiny fragment, and to share it. So I don't know where that puts me on the model, but then
I find that really interesting. So what I was hearing you say is, first of all, you have an incredible amount of self-trust in your process.
yeah, I wonder
Because
what
you know, like, for me, if I started watching Netflix or doing that,
oh no,
would
I don't
mean
watch Netflix.
okay,
No.
all right, but watching something or eating,
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like, that to me, you know, that that's just part of your process. Where for me, I would start beating myself up, like, you're distracting yourself, get your shit done, get your ass in the seat, and that sort of thing. So that is cool. But I also like your idea of, you set up the conditions for your success. So to me, like, what I'm seeing is, like, you know, at the beginning, like the Big Bang or whatever, like there was like all of this primordial soup that had all of the contents necessary for whatever the expansion, for the growth, for the manifestation of things. So it's like you set up those conditions, and then just kind of the process just happens. Like it goes, and you just flow with it. And like I said, there's just a tremendous amount of trust in your own experience. Like, you know, that it's like, this is how it is. So it might not follow those 5 or 7 steps, but it still has like, it's a non-process process. Where mine is very different. Like, I don't want feedback until until it's pretty much like a baby. And then I give, then it's feedback, and then I go and I do another set of refinements. So the first thing is like, waiting, I have the inspiration, or say like I'm creating a new class, like a class curriculum or something. The first thing I'll do is sit in meditation and just see, like, you know, like, okay, so I'm serving this population. What are the needs of that? And I'll explore it in a very, like, in the etheric, right? And then after I come out of meditation, I just write down things. I write down words and phrases and colors and ideas and like anything that comes down, and just start writing that. And then I'll mine for the gold within those things. Like, this is it, this is it. And then things, like I said, there's that sort of filtering from really kind of nebulous ideas floating around, and it'll filter and get more dense, more dense, more dense, more into form. And then I have something that I'm like, okay, now I'm going to start to work with this. So then there's like a loose planning of it. Like, and even if I'm doing my digital art, I'll be like, okay, so now I have this concept. I'm going to work with, like, let's say a 6 shape object, and then I create like shots of it because of the way that I do it. I create it like, okay, so I want to move from this to this to this to this. And then while it's moving, I'm flexible if I want things to change. But if I'm writing an article, it's the same sort of thing. I have a loose outline. I start writing things down. If I'm doing a book, I start to create islands. I don't know the order of how things are going to go, but I start to create islands. And then eventually I begin and build bridges. So you talked about the spiral, right? So it's like wide, big sweeps of things. And then I get tighter and more refined and tighter and more refined and tighter and more refined until I have something that it's like, if maybe could be a second draft or something. And then I share with people, and I'm like, okay, give me feedback. What makes sense? Because I don't like people, if I'm doing it for somebody else, then the feedback comes like almost immediately. But if this is something that I'm creating, if I'm moving something from my inside and I want to put it out into the world, I don't want too much of other people's ideas, because it's really like something that I'm working on. Now, if you're in a team, if you're in a collaboration, that's a totally different thing. But if I'm like, say, okay, I want to put this article or put this out there, I want it to be like the vision that I had. And that doesn't mean that it has to end up that way, but like I would I find that when you have too many cooks, that it can sour the broth a little bit sometimes. So anyway, so my approach is much more in alignment. It doesn't quite follow those 5 or 7, but it's definitely goes from like a more linear line.
I think it's you were able to detect the point where I trust myself in a different way, and I also can immediately detect the difference. Because when you were describing this kind of like getting everything out, all the words, the feelings, the color, the texture, like deliberately, I started to get like, oh no. Because I'm like, things are complicated enough. Why can't I pick that box? There'll be no end. But you do that because you confidently know and trust yourself that that is stage 1, and that you know that you have what it takes to then, like you say, you have a vision of what the next stage would be, the next stage, whether it's chapters for a book, an article, or one of your digital moving meditations. It's like you know how to make sequential steps, so it's not a problem to have to kind of deliberately create complexity, because it's not going to hold you back. You're not going to get like derailed by it. You're going to decisively know, okay, this is what's needed. And I think when I think about how mine is more like I create the conditions, because I need to create the conditions, because without knowing sequence of steps, not really knowing in advance what I would do and then what I would do, I need the momentum and I need my intuition to take over, so it's this whole thing of like create the conditions to begin, and then kind of it is hopeful hope that the intuition will flow me through. And I guess I'm quite fortunate in that regard, that it kind of does. But I think that's also why when I get asked about my creative process, that I often draw a blank, because I'm not sure that there's that much to say beyond the point where I create the conditions for something to begin. So yeah, it was just interesting noticing that difference in self-trust, because then you're just like, I'm not going to share. And then also that bit, like, I wouldn't you're like, well, I want feedback that's relevant and helpful. Like that's not going to be the case if I share things too soon. Whereas, like I say, for me, when I share something, it's not so much it's not that level of feedback. Like, I don't, sometimes you really need constructive feedback and you ask for a particular angle on it that's helpful. I feel like it's the accountability of just being like, this has begun. I can't hide from this. I can't, it's more just like bringing someone into the process with me alongside, that I can't kind of
Well,
pretend
that's
that
that sounds to me like one of the conditions you create.
Mm.
But I will say what's really interesting is this idea of self-trust, because now I'm realizing how important that is. Because if you don't, regardless of your process, if you don't trust yourself to be able to I don't know if the words follow through, but to kind of move, to flow with your process. Like if you don't trust yourself enough, that's where I think, last episode we talked about the psychological traps. I think that's where we get caught up, is not being able to trust that we're gonna, flow through it,
Mm-hmm.
however it looks.
Yeah. I mean, I think as well, I don't know if this is relevant, but I was teaching art for a long time. I was teaching the art GCSE, and I was teaching with what episode was it when we talked about? No, when we went into detail talking about how we've been shaped on our creative journey. Anyway, so I spoke there about teaching students a lot who had ADHD, and I think I was a great teacher for them in a way, because I knew how difficult it was going to be, because the examination board always want them to go into so much detail about all of their process and their journey, and to really demonstrate like the gathering of primary resources and showing all the stages. And I could really relate to just how hard that was, and really get inside that with my students, and we would come up with different ways of doing it and different solutions, because I experienced that myself. Self-trust. Yeah, because the biggest fear is that we stop, and that we get blocked, stopped, and I feel like, we're quite terrified of that as creatives, right? Because we're so invested in, and I know that that's coming back to that frozen place of perfectionism. I think if someone is feeling really stopped, then self-trust is the place to go to look at, and we'd have to do a whole other episode on that, really.
Yeah. Is there something else you wanted to say?
Yes, because it might be better. So, as I was writing, I came up with this. The creative process can be defined as learning to work with yourself as you are, and not as you wish you would be. Is that right? And not as you wish you were. However, that makes more sense. And I really think that speaks to the self.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, yes, so we are going to take another short break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about this week's creative challenge. All right, Gemma, we have a very simple, but I think elegant creative challenge for this week. And so I'm going to let you explain that.
Often our challenges can feel a bit weighty, diving into the unconscious and finding all these things out. So a friend of mine who's a great artist, and she has a very rich creative life, and when I caught up with her and I asked her what was going on at the moment, and she replied that it's like, I'm just listening to music, drinking coffee and listening to music, and I'm completely satisfied. And knowing that she really is, and that kind of sparked delight in me in this way of, I was just like, oh yeah, just listening to music for the sake of listening. I can't drink coffee because you have to peel me off the ceiling, and it's no joke. I can't handle it. Sometimes dabble with a mild green tea. So, caffeine is not a prerequisite for this challenge, but I feel like it can sharpen you up. There was a time when I would drink coffee and listen to music, and it just kind of sets everything off. The inner world and all the intense sensibilities go, whoa, and it's a bit like a party inside. So the challenge is just simply to set aside some time to choose some music or let it be random. I love throwing in the random in there. Let's
Me too.
Spotify.
I love that.
Yeah, Spotify, throw something random. Or I don't know, ask a friend to throw you something your way that they've been enjoying. I don't know, don't get stuck on what to listen to. And then yeah, enjoy a cup of something that of your choice and just go into it. Just see how that goes. I don't want to say too much, but I feel like so much of what we've been describing with the creative process is just like let the inner flow and find space in the outer. And I feel like listening to music activates the inner world, whatever you want to call it, in such a individual way. It really can bring you home to yourself. At least that's what I find. It's like it really is like I've forgotten. It's like I forget. I forget what's available to listen in that way. And it's such a nice feeling to remember and bring it back. So
Well, it reminds me, and I'll say this very quickly. When I work with clients before, we would talk about being more like present and being more grounded in the moment. And I would give this example, like you can go and you can pour your coffee and you can drink your coffee while you're, searching your phone and then, shoving like banana or a muffin down your throat and whatever. Or you can make your coffee, you can choose your mug, you can fill it up, you can sit, you can smell it, you can taste it, you can take a moment to just feel the way that it interacts with your body, the smell, and now you're adding the music element, right? So you could still, that period of time could still be 5 minutes, but there's such a difference between, checking your phone, doing whatever, and then 5 minutes of, intentional experience, almost like a little bit of a morning ritual, right? Like taking that moment, and it could be the same span of time, but it's such a different experience for all layers of your physical and energetic body. So I love, that's what it reminds me of. It's like you're just opening up your senses, you're opening up like your awareness of your own body and consciously connecting with the music, like expanding it beyond and hearing, like, so it makes it a fully like multi-dimensional experience, which I think is an important part of being available to receive these inspirations. So
that's lovely. That being available, I think, is so much of what we've been talking about. And it's nice, the idea that we're always available, but we're not. And modern life is going to make sure that we're less and less, right? So it's this, and it's, I had to choose. I've been doing some painting classes with toddlers, kind of like my daughter's age, and I make playlists. And she's around, so I made this piano playlist, and it was like we climbed into this bubble together, this piano bubble, and it's like I was listening through her listening, and it was just so super magical. And I think for painting, piano, I just forgotten something about, I mean, you can listen to whatever music, but I guess I'm throwing out there that if you're stuck, go to some of the piano compilations that you'll find on Spotify and see how that goes, because it was just, I don't know what the word is, ethereal.
magical. I like magical.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is our episode for today. If you want to connect with either of us, you can go to GemmaKaufman.com or go to our Etsy shop at Gemma Kaufman Art. She's got lovely prints there. If you want to find us on YouTube, you can go to The Golden Flower. If you want to know more about myself, you can go to chaosandlight.com. So yeah, follow the aliveness, nurture that spark, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.